So what Schatz found he had discovered in the motion of the invertible cube was a form of motion that in fact dynamically balanced these two forces, centripetal and centrifugal force, in this manner. So that if anything were put into a container in the center of this linkage, that container was subject to this rather remarkable motion. And this motion turned out to be the optimum motion for the mixing of, in particular, of particulate solids, which was one of the most difficult things to mix, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, but also in mixing heavy metal powders with binding agents, and also later it developed in mixing uranium with carbon in the atomic energy, in the manufacture of fuel rods and things of this sort. There are now hundreds of thousands of these machines in sizes ranging from 2 liters up to 500 liters, in use all over the world in industry, and the people who use them have no idea that the inspiration that made possible the development of these machines, first of all, came from Rudolf Steiner, and second, that it involved the relationship between the Earth and the zodiac. Now, if you were to put a line through the center of this carrier and rotate it, the shape that that line would rotate, if it were turned into a solid, would be an oloid. And that geometric form looks like this. There's a nice one carved in wood. And that geometric form, it turns out, is the only geometric solid that when you roll it down a plane, brings its entire surface into contact with the surface beneath. That made it something very, very, very special. Nobody had ever done that. Schatz discovered that if you replaced this cylindrical container here with a container of this shape, and if you used it to mix liquids, not solids, he was able to increase the effectiveness of the mixer, of the mixing action, by a factor of 10. So that the mixing process was enhanced by a factor of 10 by simply changing the shape of the container and using the same motion. In fact, by making the shape of the container the same as the shape of the motion. Anybody who looks intensely at the motion of the machine and also considers the significance of the shape of the oloid, then you can't help thinking that there's something very special here. What lies behind it, there's still a big mystery there. And there's also a considerable mystery about what potential it has. Schatz applied for a patent on this idea, and in 1971 he was awarded the 500,000th patent to be issued in Switzerland. It was a ceremonial award given to him at the Zurich Institute of Technology, and at the time they called it an epoch-making discovery. The drive system necessary for driving this geometry is quite complicated, and the machines that were being made in Basel for industrial purposes used a drive system called a pendulum drive, in which the speed of the shafts was modulated by a swinging pendulum. A very sophisticated piece of Swiss engineering, but also very expensive to build. So I undertook to try to sell the tubular mixer in Canada, and I did that only on a part-time basis for 19 years. I was representing the Willie A. Bachhoven Company, selling the tubular mixers in Canada, and this involved my going cross-country with them. I went from Vancouver to Montreal carrying a 2-litre mixer with me, stopping at all the research establishments and so on. And it was interesting the kind of response I got at some of them. There was one fellow especially at Atomic Energy of Canada in Ontario. He looked at the machine, fascinated for a long while, and without any prompting from me, he said, "This man has discovered a new law of nature." And of course he's right. That's exactly what Schatz had done. He'd discovered a new law of nature. When I started developing my own version of the Schatz mixer, I decided on 2 different approaches. One was to use linear induction motors. And the linear induction motor is unique in that it allows the mixer to be operated without there being a direct mechanical connection between the motor or the power source and the motion itself. This system has proved to be very effective. It is, I think, the optimum system for driving an inversion kinematic mixer or system. The other system we used for smaller machines, because linear induction motors are rather expensive, the other system we used was to use an elliptical drive system, in which the drive wheels are shaped like an ellipse, allowing the drive shaft to change speed constantly on a 1:2 ratio, which is what the geometry requires. So that was my contribution to Schatz's discovery. But what is, I think, still more important is the realization that we have here the beginnings of what Paul Schatz called a gentle technology, and a technology in which the relationship between the cosmos and the Earth is made manifest in some important way. The first experiment that we will do is a recapitulation of an experiment that Paul Schatz did in the early 1960s, in which he put silver as a catalyst in one of his tubular mixers and mixed bacterially contaminated water with the silver. And he found that after a very short period of mixing, the bacteria were all dead. Now, it's well known that silver is a bactericide, but the difficulty there is getting it in contact with a sufficient quantity of water. And that Schatz showed was possible using the standard tubular mixer, which is not an oloid mixer, it's just a standard mixer with using the inversion kinematic with a cylindrical shape.